My name is Justin Gage, and you're tuned in to the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast with your host, Jason Woodbury.
Welcome back. It's great to have you here for another episode. My guest this week on the show is Shahzad Ismaily, who's recorded with a real murderer's row of talents. He's recently been on records by Moses Sumney and Sam Amidon. And if you look back in his credits list, you'll see people's names like Martha Wainwright, Bonnie Prince Billy, Yoko Ono, Beth Orton, many, many more. Along with his buddies Shay Smith and Marc Ribot, he's a member of the punk jazz outfit Ceramic Dog, and last year he released a great record called Visitations with Leo Abrahams on his own Figureight Records label. Hit pause if you need to, but go check out the album cover. Very incredible cow and dog hanging out together situation. I highly recommend it. I had a great talk with Shahzad about his process, his time in the desert, and what it takes to work with so many diverse people. I hope you enjoy this one. I'm recording this once again on a Saturday, and it seems like we've got the last cold front of the winter sweeping in here in the desert before spring kicks up. Please keep all the great comments, emails, and suggestions coming. I really love hearing what you think about transmissions. You can find my contact info on Aquarium Drunkard, and I'm on social media. Spend too much time on Twitter, just like so many of us do. Leaving a rating or review helps the show out. If you want to get involved on a deeper level, you can check us out on Patreon. All right, well, let's head into my talk with Shahzad. Thanks so much for listening. I'll speak with you more on the other side.
Down in Danville, Pennsylvania, all the children are insane. First they drove me from the schoolyard, then they beat me around the brain. Pennsylvania, want to live there, place where every...
Shahzad, it's a real joy to have you here on Transmissions. I appreciate you taking the time and joining me.
Thank you. And if there's ever inappropriate auxiliary sounds coming from eating or otherwise, or a humidifier, just let me know if I should turn anything off.
You got it. Yeah, no worries.
I just did a recording recently. Mike Watt asked me to be on his show. Do you know Mike Watt? Yeah.
Yeah, the Watt from Pedro show.
Totally, and Mike Watt was, as we all probably know, esteemed bass player from the Minutemen, Firehose, and Iggy Pop and the Stooges, all that stuff. So he asked me, as part of being on a show, to send him 11 songs that I was a part of. And I was stressing really hard. I was looking through stuff. It was very difficult. And then I got up to 10. And then for the 11th one, I decided I was going to record something for him just really quick. Because it was like being interviewed at 2 p.m. I still didn't have the stuff to send him by like 9 a.m. that day. So I had 20 minutes. And I recorded a cover of PJ Harvey's song Horses from Stories of the City, Stories of the Sea.
I love that song.
Me too, man. That's one of my absolute favorites, just the mood of it. And so at one point, I'm playing the nylon string guitar, and then I'm doing the vocals as an overdub. And at one point, there's a moment where it's just instrumental, and I'm singing, and then I'm waiting for the vocals to come back in, for me to come back in. And then there was like a plastic bag that we were using to cover microphones for safety. And I picked it up and just started crinkling the crap out of it. And then I did on all the other vocal takes. So the instrumental is just like a ton of insane crinkling sound. I just thought of that just because I was telling you about extemporaneous sounds and stuff.
Was that something that you recorded there in your studio, the Figureight studio?
Yeah, totally. So I was downstairs. These days during COVID, I'm on a very weird sleep schedule. Post becoming a dad, as Michael would tell you or anyone else, you tend to wake up earlier because you go through these years of the kid waking up at 6 regularly or 7 or whatever. So after becoming a dad, I woke up, I started to wake up early. But then after COVID, when all gigs disappeared and there was no 8 p.m. onward activity, no gigs, nothing, I started to go to bed around 7 or 8 every night and then wake up at anywhere between 3:30 and 5 in the morning every day. So this was one of those mornings where I woke up at around 4 or something and I went down to the studio and took hours trying to find 11 tracks, found 10, and then recorded this one little thing.
Yeah. Watt is somebody who you've collaborated with.
Never.
Wait, no, you guys have never even been on the same record?
No, if that happened, that was totally without me knowing it. Like probably some compilation where he was on one track, I was on another track. But the closest, yeah.
No, I just realized, I guess I just made the assumption that you guys had collaborated. But there you go. I mean,
no, I was just an incredibly huge fan growing up as a young kid, like in college. Someone gave me some Minutemen records, and then I got to see Firehose live. And God, it's heavy. There's so much to admire about him. But one of the things that hits me the hardest as I get older is how much core strength he has as a human being, separate from his bass playing. Like the idea that someone pretty much day after day is the same person, gives the same amount of forward momentum to everyone around him, and is just up for tussling with life in whatever fashion it comes towards you.
Yeah.
And that's so admirable about him.
Well, certainly. Well, your list of collaborators, though, is extensive, clearly. You've got Laurie Anderson, Lou Reed, Will Oldham, John Zorn, Tom Waits, Jolie Holland, all these people who I love their records so much. You already touched on it a tiny bit, but what has the year been like? 2020, it's now 2021. What has the year been like for you in terms of collaboration? Have you still been kind of keeping up with folks and recording stuff at your studio? Or, how did the sort of year look for you on an artistic front?
I'll tell you a couple things. So number one, really quick sidebar, I want to just correct the Tom Waits thing because it has floated around in the world. Here's the actual level of Tom Waits interaction I had. Okay. Never got to play with him, but I think the reason this accidentally got into some bio somewhere is I told someone the following story, which is true. I'm sitting at dinner with a friend in New York at this, I think now defunct, home cooking Japanese restaurant called Soy. It was one block over from Tonic. Tonic was a really beautiful and important venue in New York, say 2000 to 2007, something like that, roughly. And Tonic was on Norfolk, and this was on Suffolk and Essex, about a block over. And I was eating, and my phone rings. And it was like, hello? And I said, hello? And it's like, hello, this is Tom. Tom Waits. I'm a blues musician, but I use a double bass. And then I was like, okay, and yes, yeah. And then it went. What it turned into, that call, was him saying that Marc Ribot had recommended me to go on tour with them as a guitar player because they needed someone for a tour and someone dropped out last minute. I immediately leave the restaurant, apologize to whoever I was eating with, run to the car, put Tom Waits on speakerphone, and start recording the phone call because I was just so excited. And some of the highlights were him saying, listen, you don't have to worry about your comfort. We're going to have a TV in the bus. There's going to be a TV. And and it just went on. So anyway, Waits was a request to do a tour, and then in the end, the original guitar player that was going to do the tour called back and said, "Hey, I can do it," and then that was the end of that. But okay, now this year, collaboration wise, so a lot of the wild beauty of my life has often come from totally random in-person encounters that snowball one into another circumstantially because one thing leads somewhere else in a way that you weren't expecting. So all of my collaborations happened due to being in and out in the world. For
Yeah.
example, there was a moment when I was at a coffee shop in Reykjavik, Iceland, and there's a person, two people in front of me. And that person turns around and says, "Hey, wait a minute. You play bass, right?" Turns out that person was Damien Rice, this beautiful Irish songwriter. And he was in Iceland to make a record. And his engineer was Mio, who is Valgeir Sigurdsson's brother that runs Bedroom Community and runs Greenhouse Studios in Iceland, where Ben Frost recorded, who I recorded with there, and Sam Amidon
Yeah.
and other people. So Damien was working with Valgeir's younger brother. Mio said, if you want bass and drums on this track, there's one person you should call, and he's in town, I think. His name is Shahzad. And so then Damien and I spoke at the coffee shop. Next thing I know, I'm playing drums on a track Damien's doing for Selma Hayek short film vignettes of Khalil Gibran's The Poet. And then Damien and I go onwards to become very close friends, play on some records, play shows, just really deeply be in each other's lives. So what I mean to say is, sadly, in the COVID year, collaborations are minimal to zero because they never came long distance for me. I still have yet to solve this piece of the puzzle that friends have solved through film composing, TV scoring, or telephone style. Hey, I want you to play bass on my record. I'll send you the WAV files. You send them back to me. There are friends that are in that milieu, but I never was. I always really like to be in the room and very gently read the energy of what's happening, suggest a part, see the response that's happening, that's coalescing, change the part, and we naturally come to something.
Yeah.
And so in front of me this year were a couple of collaborations, not much, and they usually came from people that I knew heavily already. So for example, I worked a lot with Sam Amidon. Sam is married to Beth Orton, who is this wonderful British singer. And so Beth and I know each other through Sam for all this time. But then Beth called and said, hey, I have some tracks and I don't know exactly where I want to go with them. And what do you think about working on them a little bit together? And then I ended up playing some bass and drums and percussion and some synths and guitars on some tracks that will be on her next record. That was a great moment. But really, the distance stuff this year was few and far between. What's in front of me, if I want to do it, is to pick up the phone and call most anybody we could think of and say, I'd like to make something with you. Now, that's doable. I could then go downstairs and make some work and send it to them and have things go back and forth, and then I mix it later. But what's challenging for me is I haven't figured out metaphysically, philosophically, how to make that long distance vibe feel vibrant.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten it to move for myself. And I have to find that solution.
I mean, you're sort of like, it seems like you've got a very communal view of music, that it is very much like an in-person, interpersonal sort of connection that really fuels some of the music. Is that how did you sort of basically learn to play music with other people? Was that sort of how things started?
I got lucky. I very badly wanted to be a musician ever since I was a tiny kid. My parents were not super into it, so there wasn't a kind of start from a young age vibe. I had to find a different path towards music. I'm primarily self-taught, and I started in earnest around 19 or 20 years old. And I began very, very early days by taking my little electric bass, short scale bass, and wearing it everywhere. And we're talking about like physics class, lunch, dinner, movies, always just sitting there.
You've got your bass with you.
A straight up, no joke, no exaggeration. It's on me, unplugged, and I'm playing all the time. Then and later on, as an older person living in New York, I started to do that with a guitar, and I would drive and play guitar constantly in New York, which was so fun. What you do is like one leg, your right leg is on the accelerator pedal. The left leg is like yoga pose style, gripping the steering wheel between the big toe and the next toe. And so you're driving with both your feet and then just shredding the guitar. Sometimes there's a metronome plugged into the car stereo. Now,
Thank you for the how-to. I'm still I'm going to insist that listeners don't try that at home. But yeah, continue.
I can send in some video for anyone that wants to DM either one of us. So I got lucky in that after my college years, everything about playing music was having the instrument on when I'm at a gig or a rehearsal or a recording. Mm-hmm. And when I moved to New York and started playing in earnest there, every day of the week, I had 3 to 7 things to go to that day. So I'd wake up in the morning, I'd have a dance class that I had to play some drums at. Then I had a rehearsal. Then I had maybe like some improvising with a friend for fun. And then I had between 1 and 3 gigs a night in different venues, different kinds of music. And so I was so happy that the way I got better playing my instrument was always on stage in some fashion. And that meant that the choices I made, the way to play a bass line was always in relationship to what was happening around me. It wasn't just in relationship to the metronome or in relationship to a static song that you're listening to off a record trying to learn something. Because unfortunately, while that is definitely a good way to go, the record is not moving with you. It's a static object, and so therefore you don't get the energetic understanding of relating. One of my favorite bits of information to pass on when this conversation or this topic comes up is that a friend from college studied Balinese music, Javanese and Balinese, Indonesian gamelan. And as he went over there and studied at very high level, like Fulbright, there every year doing research papers, he told me musicians in the gamelan don't have a conceptual understanding of why you would play your instrument alone.
Sure.
Like it doesn't. It's like that kind of story they tell about native peoples. Like it's pretty terrible in terms of racism, but basically, if you take anybody that's never seen an elevator before, and they look at the elevator, the doors open, some people go in, the doors close, the doors open, different people come out. Like conceptually, it doesn't make sense until you take the elevator ride. So, a gamelan player doesn't understand why, even if their part is do dee dee do da, why you would put on a metronome and play do dee dee do da when it's supposed to be do da da dee do da da do da da, and it's in relationship to other things. And so the only way, if you don't know how to play your part well, you would immediately pick up the phone, call the other person, and say, "Can we meet up tomorrow at 7:00? I need to work on this part." And I got very lucky that I learned to play a Western instrument in that same way of just very socially all the time.
What were the first kind of bands that you played in?
First band, I'm in college. I'm in Simon's Rock Bard College in Western Massachusetts. And my dear friend, who is 2 years older than me, Zig, he was called Zig at the time. Now he's called Rhett Pepe. And we both ended up living in Arizona for a really good stretch of our lives together. He played guitar and wanted to start a band. And his guitar playing was totally visual art style, like no chords, no notes, just like just noise guitar. And so that left me as the bass player in a trio setting with the drummer with all the responsibility of trying to have chords and harmonic and melodic sort of framework for his lyrics, his noise guitar, and then the drums. And that was the first kind of band experience I had. And I think it set the tone for me to see the bass as a wider, more piano-like object than just a bass line space.
You obviously you play the bass a lot, but you play all sorts of stuff. You know, you play drums. You put out a great guitar record last year with Leo Abrahams.
Yeah.
Visitations, which is a really really cool record. But does the bass feel, of all the instruments, I mean, if you had to say, like, if you had to pick just one, do you think it would be the bass?
It would be one of two. It'd either be the bass because it's the thing I played the longest and have the most understanding of as a player, and also knowing its role in records. So knowing that, okay, if I'm going to walk in and play bass to your song tomorrow, from a kind of Motown soul bass player's rhythm section point of view, this is what I might play. However, from the point of view of like an indie rock player, this is what I might play. Or from the point of view of an experimental musician that is seeing the bass as kind of like this textural object, this is what I might play. So I feel like the bass is where I have a lot of understanding. But the second instrument I'd want to put in there would probably be the drums. And the reason for that is my relationship to the drums is that I have a good sense of time when that's needed. And then secondly, if I'm hearing a drum part in my head, unless it's super complicated, I can sit down and immediately play it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that then puts an instrument closer to your abilities. The thing about the bass, guitar, piano, since I'm still further away when it comes to ear training, singing a melody and knowing where it is, those instruments are still farther from me. And I would still have to do a lot of work to hear a line in my head or have someone sing it and then know right away this is where it is on the instrument.
Is that something that you're doing usually when you're working, like, let's say you're working with Sam or something like that, you know, someone who you've worked a lot with? Are you usually imagining the sound and then setting out to do it? How often do you start sort of figuring it out in response to even what you're doing? You know what I mean? Like you hear a sound and you go, okay, I think that, you know, because it feels to me like there's a, you know, as a listener, and what you've talked about a little bit is that it sounds like listening is very integral to what you're doing, because you have to match everybody's else. You have to match the other things. But how often are you sort of almost reacting to your own, you know, experiment and then follow that? I mean, does it work both ways? I imagine it does.
No, you're right. It does work both ways. And because you asked about Sam, in the case of Sam, I'm lucky because this is a singer who's saying, look, my role will be to give my central monolith of feeling so hardcore that you could do anything you want and it will not disturb it.
Yeah.
So therefore, my understanding of you, Shahzad, is you follow your instincts. And even if they're obtuse, if they bring horror, if they bring sadness, if they bring lightness, I just trust you to go there and I'm going to stay on the road that I'm on. So with Sam, my desire is to sit down at the drums or the bass or keyboard or whatever and connect to some kind of immediate conduit that I feel something and then it's just coming right away. Like,
yeah,
sort of like, I guess, like being at a kitchen sink, turning the faucet on, the water's just there, and like that kind of immediacy.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You, I know that a few years ago, I interviewed your bandmate Marc Ribot about the Ceramic Dog record. Is it Why Are You Here? I think it's that. Yeah, Why Are You Here? And there's a song on that called Pennsylvania 66666 that it's kind of this cool slow burn. And we talked a little bit about the lyrics of that. That was something that was inspired by conversations with you, and I think you wrote some of those lyrics as well, if I remember correctly.
I think so, or it was just some sort of communal tumble, like we were in a rehearsal space, and then he was just asking me something, and I said something that ended up in the lyrics also.
Well, so I mean, what the song sort of focuses on is this idea of you as sort of like a young kid, a Pakistani kid in Pennsylvania, and all of the weirdness and, you know, I don't know how much of it's exaggerated or because he said that he exaggerates stuff all the time, but, you know, sort of some of the physical violence, even whatever that was, you know, that there was some of that growing up for you. I now that we're in this position where there's a new president, things have changed a little bit. I think there's like a tendency to maybe wonder if that side of things is now gone. We don't have to worry so much about that. I don't think that's a correct assumption. And I'm curious, for you, somebody who has not always had, a political context of your work, but certainly sometimes, how are you feeling right now as we think about these elements of our culture that have not gone away, but are still something that music can maybe address or challenge? Have you found yourself drawn to sort of political content over the recent months?
I can say that when we were touring the songs on that record, when Marc, Ribot, and Chess Smith and I were touring, and it was a period of time where Marc's writing was really political, I can say that I was so proud to be on stage. I just felt so, in the tiniest way, I felt what it might have felt like when you were protesting in the 60s, or when you were playing a song that was directly speaking about the Vietnam War while it was happening. And
Yeah.
we were just a trio playing in front of 400 people in a small town in Europe on tour. So it's a small flavor of that, but it's still, I can imagine what kind of pride you would feel that your art has an extra layer of importance to it and is relating to something that's happening, and that you have the guts to do that. And for that reason, I always sometimes I watch YouTube videos because I have a trouble going to sleep one night, or I just am like, I just want to shut my brain off in the worst way. And I sometimes enjoy watching YouTube videos that have happened from a long time ago till today, of artists that are really high level, that go on a TV show like David Letterman and don't end up talking in a flat way about their record coming out, but instead talk about something that's heavy that's going on in the world.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is when Marlon Brando's interviewed by Jack Parr, and straight up he's like, you can ask me about film, that's basically the same as carpentry, you're just building a house, but what we could talk about is Native American land rights. And in fact, I brought 3 professors, and I was wondering if you don't mind if I just pass the mic to them. And this is the equivalent of like Jimmy Fallon of his time. And I admire that so much. I was so happy to see Taylor Swift eventually be like, you know what? I don't have to be quiet to make sure I don't alienate some of my fans. Same with Jim Gaffigan.
The comedian,
that also made me super happy, because he was just like, I can't, now we're at a line where I have to say something, and I don't really care what the repercussions are. And because he was known for being apolitical, not cursing, he could make a joke about school lunches so that anybody could be the audience, like the most deeply racist, white supremacist, like Aryan Nation person sitting right next to anybody else, so they both be enjoying the comedy show. And he was finally like, I just can't, I have to talk now. And it was so beautiful. So for me personally, I occasionally think of the political context of what I do in the following way. Now, this is maybe giving too much credit to the underlayers of our psychology, but here was my thought. If you come to see a show and the drummer is playing straight time, eighth notes on the hi-hat, like a beat, and then at some point the drummer just goes into a free space of just like textural drumming, what it's saying to you content-wise, but on a structural content, not the front content of the lyrics, but like the back content of the sort of architecture of the moment, it's saying you don't need to continue in the role you're used to continuing in. And
it's possibility, yeah.
This is the thing, is that like people in film school will say that meaning is real, in the sense that sometimes I've heard film school theorists criticize films that are trying to be weird. They say the following critique. They say, look, if you write weird dialogue and you make weird costumes and you have a weird character. But then you go with the traditional 3-part narrative of hero loses everything, hero part 3, hero regains everything. Then you're giving a duplicitous sense of avant-garde versus conservative, and you have to pay attention to whether there's a conservative element in the architecture below what you're doing. And if you are really trying to push something, try to push it in the understructure as well as the superficial content layer. And I think in that way, because I've done a lot of improvising and I believe in it a lot, I think there's a little bit of the political possibility of, like, I guess anarchy would be the closest, but the political possibility that, look, maybe you don't have to talk, think, and act the way you're used to doing. You could try a different way.
Well, and I mean, I've asked a couple of folks who've been on this show sort of about the philosophical or even political possibilities of what improvised music allows, which is, like you said, almost an anarchic sort of sense of freedom, which is to say there is no prescribed role. You know, if you're playing drums in an avant-garde trio, you don't have to keep the beat necessarily. You know, that's what we're used to hearing drums do, but maybe you could do whatever else, or you could have the bass serve as a purely textural instrument, you know, and all of that stuff is like you're saying, sort of taking the role and saying nobody has to assign the role to you. You can divine whatever that is. And I do think that there are some sort of political possibilities about that. And I think that, you know, that Ceramic Dog record came out at this moment where it just felt so good to have some righteous rage, you know? And I think that maybe there's still a lot of need for that kind of righteous rage. And I don't know, we'll see what happens. But I do remember, you know, in like let's say the Obama era, you know, some of that righteous rage, it's like some people didn't necessarily want that. You know what I mean? We would like to feel something other than rage. And I understand that impulse too, but I don't know. I just that's such a cool record, and I feel like it has such a. I'm glad to hear that when you were playing it, you felt like you were tapped into that revolutionary spirit. But it sounds like you're saying that can exist outside of the, lyrical content or outside of the specifics. That revolutionary spirit still can just be informing any kind of music.
That's right, and also. I don't know, for some reason, what's coming to mind right now is how we choose to live as an individual. And it may be that either through Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, other things, people then, like a large group of people, see how you live. In the old days, pre all that stuff, maybe your 10 friends were the people that saw how you live. So if you're recycling, they're the ones that know about it. But when you have a large audience and plus social media, you could also impact people by how you're living. So, for example, Damien Rice was sort of consciously trying to do a tour by boat where he was just only hitting coastal cities. And that was him trying to think through, how do I function as a touring musician with a smaller climate imprint or climate footprint? And he was sleeping on the boat every night. And I joined him for a few days of that. And it was really beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds...
Or, for example... on the third floor of the building where my studio is a production space that Gatya has, the artist that did Somebody, that I used to know, that fellow. And he and I just passed in the hallway the other day, and he said, look, I really think we need to make sure that we start with this building changing its eco footprint. And so if you need me to research that, or if you need me to put anything towards the cost of that, let's do it together. So with him, it was this idea where he was like, look, I really need to be walking the walk of whatever I want to, whatever change I want to make in the world.
Yeah. You brought up film a little bit and film criticism. You've worked a fair amount on music for film. You scored some stuff yourself, and You worked with Johan Johansson, right? The guy who did music for Sicario, and
Yeah.
he's done other stuff too. Did you guys work together on Sicario? Was that the project?
It was very gentle. Here's how it went. Over all these years, I've had a strangely deep connection with Iceland, and it went through different phases. It started with liking the landscape, and then working on a lot of records there with people, and then dating someone who was Icelandic, and now marrying her, and then getting to amass a large group of friends and a community there. So I knew of Johan in passing before everything got intense with how many scores he was doing. And he was a friend of a friend, wonderful person. And then one day, I think he was physically in LA and called and said, look, I need a lot of drums for this Sicario score, and I want to hire you and this fellow Danny Frankel that got recommended to him from someone else. And Danny, I went on to learn, played drums with Katie Lang and lots of other great people, was a big session LA fellow. And so the next thing I knew, Danny and I were just sitting next to each other in a studio in LA, just playing really wild, loud, heavy drums for like a couple days in a row. It was super fun. Johan's in the control room and giving us instructions and suggestions and that kind of thing. That's as far as it went. Then another time, he was doing the score for Mother, I think. And at my studio in New York, we were getting some stems to do overdubs and processing to and sent it back. Also, there was a time when Johan had a studio in Berlin, and I knew Dustin O'Halloran quite well, who also does a lot of scores. And Dustin and Johan, and then my partner Geetha and other people were sort of like a little crew in Berlin. So I used to hang a bit there. The thing that I really know about Johan is that a friend of mine, Randall Dunn, went very heavy working with him on Mandy, I believe.
Yeah, great score, great movie.
Yeah, super, super, super awesome. And the stories that Randall told me about working on it were really, really great. And then it was hard because Randall saw a lot of the darkness that was going on.
Yeah,
and being from Seattle, Randall had an understanding of drug culture when it goes to a really dark place. And so out of all the people around Johan, I think Randall really saw it, and he was really sad that he couldn't turn it around.
Do you like scoring films? And I mean, is that something? Do you enjoy the? I feel like that's of all the stuff that you've done. I mean, you've done all sorts of stuff. You know, dance productions, records, live things. You know, music for television and film. There's very tight structures around that. You know, it has to match very specific things, and I think you have to make a lot of people happy in order for it to work. You know, I'm curious if you find that to be an enjoyable process or an enjoyable challenge.
It was so hard, and I wish that I'd stuck with it at the time when it was opening for me, because certainly now I'd love to be in that field. But I didn't, because it didn't suit my temperament at all. And it still doesn't, but it especially didn't at that time. Here I was, I did a film composer's lab, like residency lab object at the Sundance Institute. And they had 6 film composers in their little trailers learning how to score. And then they had visiting teachers who were typically people really big time in LA, like James Newton Howard, people that were scoring things like Lord of the Rings and whatnot. And so I ended up coming out of that and scoring this film Frozen River. And it was a beautiful film, great director, and it did really well. But I was coming off of playing gigs every day with somebody. And when you play a gig, all you're meant to do is for 1 hour to 1 hour and a half, be in it as hardcore as you can. You get off stage, and usually some number of people are coming up to you saying, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much. Then your work is over at 10 o'clock. You're socializing with your friends. You're laughing. You're telling stories. Then you go to a hotel and you're by yourself, and you can watch a movie and turn the heat all the way up. And then the next day you're on a plane reading a book. So like it went from that experience to 30 days in a row trying to work around 10 hours a day. And everybody you talk to all through the day is saying it's not quite hitting it. Right. Or they're saying this is not working at all. Should we go with someone else? And that's like the whole 30 days.
Oh,
And unfortunately, I didn't have the temperament for it. I just was like, I just like, this is way too emotionally difficult. I didn't hang. And then now I have friends who hung in there and are doing like amazing in terms of finances, artwork. However, I realize that I'm not the right judge here, but I wonder sometimes, artwork wise, if you're lucky if it's a healthy situation you're in, because what you want is you want a director that believes in you, therefore you have
right.
some room to make a great score. Or what you want is a life where you're scoring but you're also gigging, because I've seen people go deep into that space and then they're kind of just like in this automaton world where they're just working on the next score. And it's great because someone calls them and says, look, I'll pay you 40,000 or 100,000 or 1 million or whatever. And it's amazing. But you have to go back to thinking about what makes me happy and what do I want like the sum total of my life to be or feel like or to mean. And to also try to remember that somewhere between 50 to 100 years from now, no one will remember anything you've done. And certainly 1,000 years from now, less people, 5,000 years from now, even less people. So that idea of like meaning and what is life is worth looking at occasionally.
What have you? I mean, this is a daunting question, but you know, do you feel like in your artistic and your creative life that you've found something like the meaning of life?
Yeah, definitely. And what I'll say is there's several times when I'm on stage playing and I have a sense of being lost. And for me, that's really viscerally amazing. Like this feeling that you don't know where you're going. You have this like very slight feeling that you're not the one physically playing the thing you're holding right now, but sound is still happening. Like this feeling of being one of the water molecules in a crushing wave that's moving forward. And you're definitely not responsible for the wave, but you also are responsible for it. It's an interesting double double perspective. So those moments have happened for me a bunch. Like I might play a gig and it might happen 5 times in that 1 hour, and so that is definitely one place where it's at for me.
Yeah, this idea of the astronaut Edgar Mitchell. I don't know if you've ever heard this story, but he was in orbit. He caught this. He caught basically a glimpse of the Earth in orbit, and he had this moment that he later, said was something like the concept of samadhi. Like a universal consciousness, where all of a sudden he realized he was a part of everything and everything was a part of him. And it was just this moment that completely changed his life,
Wow.
and to hear you say that maybe on a smaller scale, maybe not. I mean, you tell me that there's been feelings almost something like that where you're part of this thing. I mean, yeah, of course, if you feel that, I have to imagine that just instills in you this drive to at least make sure that the possibility for that is occurring regularly enough in your life.
That's really well said. And I feel like when I'm looking for a teacher, I'm looking for a person I can interact with that might help direct me to that landing point. And so I often feel like saying that Marc Ribot is a teacher in that way to me, and Milford Graves also, because these are 2 people I played concerts with, and because from my perspective, they're often in the space I just described. What they're doing then by their playing and turning and looking at me is they're saying, here's where the door is. Then I get to see the door, I get to walk through the door, and then at the end of our hour, I know a little bit more where to look for the door tomorrow. And that's the experience I've gotten from working with Marc over these years and playing with Milford also.
Is Marc Ribot a fun dude to hang out with and talk with? Because I got the sense from speaking with him that he was a real a very generative force in that regard.
Man, absolutely, like all day straight up. If you, and particularly like, when you get to play with someone for that long, their life, all of your lives have these phases. Like there might be a phase where for Marc, maybe parenting is hard, or like sociopolitics, because he's very active, is hard, and so that might be a tour where he's a little bit quieter or a little bit more reserved, and then might be another tour where the chemistry of his life and your life is lighter, but kind of regardless, when Marc and Chester and I are on tour, from the moment you wake up and you're in each other's company for an 8-hour train ride until you go back to your hotel rooms later at night, it's so fun. It's so light and so real and loving and honest and beautiful. And I've always appreciated the bands that I play with where the travel is also just as fun as playing the gig with them.
You have spent a lot of your life traveling. You've studied music in Pakistan, India, Turkey, Mexico, Japan. I mean, all over the place. Iceland, which you've brought up a couple times. Has it been painful not being able to travel due to the pandemic?
I'd say it's been both, because if there's any credit that we want to give to astrology, and we probably have at least some fruit nut listeners who are like my wife, and I'm starting to become that as well.
Me too.
Yeah, that's great. Sometimes it takes your partner, and then all of a sudden you're like, and then the tarot card said, and so I'm
on board. Yeah,
me too. I'm so in it right now due to Geetha, especially starting it. But if that stuff is worth looking into, then the Gemini space is about like a big, like electric power plant kind of throw switch that gets clicked on one side or the other one. And so this COVID situation threw the switch so hard towards being alone at home in your apartment. Not quite alone, because my mom's here, my daughter's here often, and Geetha, my partner's here, but basically never leaving, never seeing anybody. Groceries are delivered in a box downstairs. And I'm now so in it and so used to it that I just straight up like it. Like I would rather quarantine than get the vaccine because I'm a tiny bit worried about it. So it didn't take long, and once that switch was thrown, I didn't miss it. But I can definitely say that when I'm on the other side of it, I love the fact that I love looking at an itinerary that I got as a PDF coming up soon, where every day I'm in a different country. It just I love that kind of traveling, and I would happily like tour and be away from home every single day.
Yeah. I guess the door has opened just I see a crack in the door as you were the door cracked a little bit towards the sort of paranormal or mystical. I was looking for interviews with you to prepare for this one, and there are some out there. There's one on YouTube where you discuss being in Iceland, speaking with someone who told you that you had a brother. Your brother died when you were very young, right? How old were you when that happened?
I was around 2 years old, and he lived something like 5 or 7 days.
This person, and you can tell the story better than me, but they basically said that you were meant to be a musician, or you were a musician because he was meant to be a musician. Is that correct?
That was it. Like basically, this was the beginning of Geetha and I being together, and I love how much of the esoteric world she's brought into my landscape, whether it's tarot or astrology or mediums or all kinds of stuff. So in this case, Iceland has, I feel like, a pretty solid tradition of people speaking to the other side. Like it's a part of the fabric of their society and their awareness. And so Geetha set up this appointment with this older woman. She's sitting across from the table, and I didn't say much because I was excited to see, with no prompting, what would she say, what would she discover. And so she did say, unprompted, you had a brother, he was the musician, you're the priest. When he died, he inhabited you, and that's what pulled you towards music so heavily. And what was so moving about that in terms of the sense making of it, it was around that age, around 2.5, where I really wanted to be a musician, super hardcore.
Yeah. When she told you that, how did you feel? How did you feel hearing that?
I mean, I felt amazing because both words are just signifiers of such beautiful spaces. Like when I think of the word priest, I have not grown up like a lot of friends in like a Catholic or Western Christian space where priest means something really dark, whether it's sexual abuser or authoritarian or just heavy stuff. I am now hearing the word priest and thinking, here's someone that with love shepherds you to an awareness of other things.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it. Like even like in that sense, a priest could be someone that cooks really well and makes the kind of meal for you where you're like, oh, I didn't realize that I could spend time making food like open up in a way, and then the flavor was different. I'm just not used to that idea. So priest, when I think of that word, it's more like a shepherd that says, let's go over here and I want you to see something that once you see it, you'll maybe aim your life differently and receive more because of it. So when she said that, I was just so touched and so happy. And I suppose what I thought was I should take myself more seriously, that as that astronaut said, as one part of a whole, if I do the best I can and if I am really giving to people, then the whole, back to looking at the whole, it can move slightly to a better place.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's I left that moment just feeling like, oh, I have potential to give good things to the world, and therefore I should try to take that seriously a little bit.
Sure, sure. So when you're working with an artist, that's like, as I have already ran down some of the people you've worked with, I have to imagine that someone like Lou Reed is not he's got a very specific thing that he was going for, or if you're working with, anybody, if you're working with Will Oldham, these are people who have very, you've worked with all kinds of people and in all kinds of settings. So I wonder if you're pressed and somebody says, how do you be a good collaborator? What makes a good collaborator? For you, is it sort of a combination of that priest and artist thing where you're sort of like willing to guide, willing to be guided? How does it work for you?
That's really well said. I think just landing on willing to guide, willing to be guided is so beautiful. And also, as a collaborator, I've been in different spots in the hierarchy. I might be like producing engineering, or I might be playing bass, and they have different weights to your presence in the room. I suppose that if I'm producing or engineering with someone, I really have loved this word doula a lot, which came into my vocabulary recently because there was a doula present when my daughter was born. And so it's basically someone that is not planning on giving you a shot and dealing with the medical side of things. All they're doing is they're holding their arms open to make it more comfortable for you to exist in the room and do the thing that you have to do. And so that's the space I tend to occupy, almost whether I'm a bass player or whether I'm producing or engineering. This feeling that the notes I might play on the bass make it more possible that the words that the person was trying to land have an area to come down into. Or similarly, if I'm producing or engineering, I'm trying to make the room feel comfortable in such a way that the human that wants to make the art comes out more. That almost like if you could close your eyes and imagine in time-lapse quickness, like a bunch of mushrooms just slowly growing off the wall into a space.
Who are some people who have made you feel that kind of openness and comfort that you've played with?
That's a really nice question, because I so often think about these things unidirectionally, like what can I give to the room at this moment? But I can say that Sam absolutely is one of the people that makes me feel like that, and personally as well. And that's actually even more rare. I don't know what your life landscape is like, but sometimes it's hard to find that friendship where you feel like you're on the edge of being able to laugh fairly often, and also you could say whatever you want, because
Right.
now where we're going to with being careful about hurting each other's feelings, which is fine, it just makes us all a bit more guarded. And we probably have some friendships where you really know, okay, I could say anything I want to right now, and I can trust that I'll be received all right, and that it will be fun to be in company with each other. Sorry, just 1 second. I was just going to chill the dishes in the background for a second. So,
No worries.
what I wanted to say about Sam is that Sam and I have intentionally set up this position with each other where he could pick up the phone or I could pick up the phone, and we could say whatever we want to each other, and we could hang up if we want to just hang up the call. So, for example, because it's a luxury, sometimes Sam will call me, he'll start talking, and I will straight up say, Sam, I can't believe how boring this is right now. And then I'll just hang up. And I can't do that with almost anybody. So I like to take that space, because the moment I'm done hanging up, what it did is it made me feel so much like Shahzad is allowed to be in the room right now. How he feels, what he thinks is he could totally be here in the room right now.
Well, yeah, I think about all of the greatest, friendships and the greatest relationships I've had, and how often those are the relationships where neither of us has to say anything for an extended period of time. That's such a vulnerable space in a weird way. You don't feel the need to fill up the room with chatter. That's a real special space. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your Sunday. God, it's been such a real pleasure speaking with you. But before we go, I do want to ask, you alluded to it earlier, you studied biochemistry at ASU.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask you your impressions of the Sonoran Desert.
Man, it's the best. It's the best. It's funny, just before as I was thinking you might be ending soon, I was going to give some shout outs to the landscape and the place, because it was a big deal to me. I moved to Tempe just after college, so like 1993 or 92, and I was around 22 or so. And then I stayed there until 1998 or so, when I was around 28 or 29. And there's many things that were super important about living there for me. Stinkweed's Records, Kimber Lanning, Modified Arts. I mean, Tempe was where I ended up, luckily, falling into improvising and the improvised music scene. And it was at one of the first Modified Arts, I think. It was like this weird triangular shaped stage in Phoenix somewhere. And I don't know where. It must have moved several times since then. But Modified Arts and those early gigs were how I found improvising, which then became such a big part of my life in New York. Oddly enough, playing a klezmer gig with my friend Corey Fogel at the Java Road Cafe near Mill was how I got into like klezmer. And then one of my first gigs in New York was playing bass for David Krakauer, who was a clarinetist in the Klezmatics, which I wouldn't have known anything about that music if it wasn't for Corey and Java Road and 4 people drinking coffee outside.
Tempe, Arizona, a known hotspot of klezmer music.
Totally hilarious. And then Stinkweeds was at a time when people still walked into a record store and asked the person behind the counter, what should I buy? This is what I bought a few months ago. What would you suggest? And so therefore, Kimber and Stinkweeds is directly responsible for me knowing about Low, Mazzy Star, the first Marc Ribot record of Cubanos Mestizos. I bought it there, and it still shocks me to this day that years later, that's someone that is that I play with and with whom I have a really important relationship. So Arizona was a big deal. Also, Arizona taught me about the outdoors, because I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I grew up with really serious dust and pollen allergies. So the fucking forest landscape of Pennsylvania and the temperature meant that I was mostly an indoor kid with the windows closed, carpets, and that was it. Then I get to Arizona, and being someone that's slight of frame and easily cold, finally, and I'm in the desert landscape where there's not much pollinating anything. Finally, I live a life where I open the door and I walk straight to my porch and put a chair down, and I'm mostly outside. And I
Yeah.
loved it so much. It was so healthy to become connected to nature more in that way.
Yeah. I mean, you got to put up with some heat, but man, we've got
Yeah.
good landscapes out here. That's
Oh,
for sure.
for sure. It's so beautiful.
Well, Shahzad, again, it's been such a pleasure, and I get the sense that I could talk to you for another couple hours, and
I feel the same.
It would continue to be enlightening. So let's make it a plan to catch up again at some point on the show, because
I
it'd be
would
great
be
to have
happy
you.
to. Let's do part 2, please. I'd really love that.
We'll do that, but for now, we'll call it. And thank you so much for your time. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
Same. Take good care of yourself.
That's going to do it for us this week on the show. I'm Jason Woodbury. I write, produce, and host the program. Our audio is edited by Andrew Horton. Sarah Goldstein does graphic design, and Jonathan Marc Walls creates visual assets. Our executive producer is Aquarium Drunker founder Justin Gage. On the recommendation front, before I get out of here, I'm going to recommend that you tune in on Sunday afternoon/evening for Radio Free Aquarium Drunkard on Dublab, which will run from 4 to 8 p.m. Pacific. I'm hosting my show, Range and Basin, there alongside Tyler Wilcox's Doom and Gloom from the Tomb. We'll be joined by some great guests. You can find more information on Aquarium Drunkard and Dublab. On the non-Aquarium Drunkard front, I'll recommend the new Adam Curtis BBC docuseries Can't Get You Out of My Head. It's absolutely fascinating use of archival footage and music and obscured history. I don't think there's any legitimate way to watch it here in the U.S., but it's not hard to find. Just search that out and you'll be able to turn it up. All right, I'll be back next week with another strange conversation for these strange times. We'll be joined by Martin Courtney of Real Estate. So take care of yourself. Until then, we'll speak soon.
Thank you.